The sun was setting on a quiet highway just outside Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The world seemed peaceful, almost dreamlike, as cars sped past fields of golden crops and scattered farmhouses. Among those driving along, this lonely stretch was a group of 3 friends, Mark, Sarah, and James. They had spent the weekend camping in Wisconsin, laughing around campfires, fishing by the lake, and sharing stories under the stars. Now they were heading home, tired but happy. Their old SUV rattled slightly as it rolled down the road, its windows half open to let in the cool evening breeze. Mark, who was behind the wheel, hummed along to the soft music playing on the radio. Sarah sat beside him, flipping through photos on her phone while occasionally pointing out something funny or memorable. In the back seat, James stretched his legs, trying to get comfortable after hours of sitting still. Life felt simple, uncomplicated, and perfect. But then, something caught their attention, a glint of metal reflecting the fading sunlight. At first glance, it looked like a broken-down car parked awkwardly on the shoulder of the highway. Its hazard lights blinked rhythmically, casting tiny bursts of red into the growing darkness. Most drivers would have ignored it, assuming someone else would stop to help. But not these 3. "Should we check it out?" Sarah asked, leaning forward to peer at the vehicle more closely. "It's probably nothing," James replied lazily from the back seat. "Just another flat tire." Mark hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Let's see if they need help. You never know." He slowed the SUV and pulled over behind the stranded car. As they stepped out onto the asphalt, the air smelled faintly of gasoline mixed with freshly cut grass. The car ahead of them wasn't some beat-up old junker. It was sleek, shiny, and expensive-looking. A black luxury sedan that screamed wealth. Standing next to the car was a man in his late 50s. His tailored suit was slightly wrinkled, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead despite the cool evening. He knelt beside one of the rear tires, which lay deflated on the ground. Tools were scattered around him, but frustration was etched across his face. "Need a hand?" Mark called out, approaching cautiously. The man looked up, startled at first, then visibly relieved. "Oh, thank God," he muttered, standing up and brushing dirt off his hands. "I've been stuck here for nearly an hour." "I'm Mark," he said with a friendly smile, extending his hand. "This is Sarah and James." "Richard Langston," the man replied, shaking each of their hands firmly. "And yes, I could definitely use some help." Sarah noticed how uneasy Richard seemed. For someone dressed so impeccably, changing a tire clearly wasn't part of his daily routine. She couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. "No problem," James chimed in, already crouching down to inspect the damaged tire. "We've got this." As James worked on loosening the lug nuts, Mark grabbed the jack from their own car and showed Richard how to position it properly. Sarah rummaged through their trunk for gloves and a flashlight, making sure everyone stayed safe as daylight faded. Together they moved efficiently, turning what could have been a stressful situation into a team effort. Throughout the process, Richard watched intently, asking questions whenever he didn't understand something. "So you just turn it this way?" he asked, gesturing toward the wrench. "Exactly," Mark explained patiently. "Once you've loosened the nuts, the rest is pretty straightforward." Despite his initial nervousness, Richard began to relax. He even managed a small laugh when James joked about how many people underestimated the importance of knowing basic car maintenance. "You'd think someone like me would have roadside assistance on speed dial," Richard admitted sheepishly. "But honestly, I don't usually drive myself anywhere. My assistant handles all of that." "Well, today you're getting a crash course in DIY repairs," Sarah teased lightly, earning a chuckle from everyone. By the time the spare tire was securely in place, night had fully fallen. Stars twinkled overhead and crickets chirped softly in the distance. Richard stood back, surveying their work with obvious admiration. "I can't tell you how much I appreciate this," he said earnestly. "Most people wouldn't bother stopping these days." "It's no big deal," Mark replied with a shrug. "We've all been there before." Richard shook his head, clearly unconvinced. "Still, kindness isn't something I take for granted anymore, especially not from strangers." Before they left, Richard insisted on exchanging contact information. "If there's ever anything I can do to repay you, please don't hesitate to reach out," he said, handing each of them a business card embossed with elegant lettering. They thanked him politely, but didn't think much of it. After all, helping someone change a tire wasn't exactly life-changing, or so they thought. As they climbed back into their SUV and resumed their journey home, none of them realized that this seemingly ordinary act of goodwill would set off a chain of events neither predictable nor forgettable. What started as a simple roadside encounter would soon grow into something far greater, weaving its way into the fabric of their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Weeks passed after the roadside encounter, and life for Mark, Sarah, and James returned to its usual rhythm. They went back to their jobs, hobbies, and routines, occasionally reminiscing about their camping trip and the peculiar man whose tire they had helped fix. Richard Langston's name came up now and then in conversation, but only as a passing thought. None of them expected to hear from him again. After all, why would someone as wealthy and busy as Richard keep in touch with three strangers? Then, one sunny afternoon, something unexpected happened. Mark was sorting through his mail when he noticed a thick envelope tucked between bills and advertisements. It stood out immediately. The paper was heavy, creamy white, and sealed with an intricate wax stamp bearing the letter L. Curious, he opened it carefully and pulled out a card written in elegant cursive handwriting. The invitation read, "Dear friend, you showed me kindness when I needed it most. I'd like to repay your generosity in person. Please join me for dinner at my estate this Saturday evening. Transportation will be arranged. RSVP by Thursday. Warm regards, Richard Langston." Mark blinked, reading the words twice to make sure he wasn't imagining things. He called Sarah and James right away, only to discover that they had received identical invitations. "What do you think?" Sarah asked over the phone, her voice tinged with both excitement and suspicion. "It could be a scam," James suggested cautiously. "I mean, who sends random invites like this?" "But what if it's real?" Mark countered. "We did help him out and he seemed sincere." After much debate, curiosity won over caution. They decided to accept the invitation together. On ease. Saturday morning, a sleek black car arrived at each of their homes. A chauffeur waiting patiently outside. The drivers were polite but offered no explanation beyond confirming their destination. Richard Langston's private estate located deep in the countryside. As they drove further away from the city, the scenery shifted dramatically. Skyscrapers gave way to rolling hills, dense forests, and sprawling fields. Eventually, the car turned onto a long, winding driveway flanked by towering oak trees. At the end stood a magnificent mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and fountains. It looked like something out of a movie. When they stepped out of the cars, Richard greeted them warmly at the entrance. Dressed casually yet elegantly in slacks and a sweater, he appeared more relaxed than the last time they'd seen him. "Welcome," he said, shaking hands with each of them. "I'm so glad you could make it." He led them inside, where they were immediately struck by the opulence of the house. High ceilings adorned with chandeliers, walls lined with priceless artwork, and plush furniture created an atmosphere of refined luxury. Yet despite its grandeur, the space felt inviting rather than intimidating. Over dinner, a lavish spread prepared by a personal chef, they talked about everything from travel adventures to childhood memories. Richard listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and sharing anecdotes of his own. For the first time, they saw glimpses of the man behind the wealth, someone who valued connection and authenticity above all else. "I've spent most of my life building businesses and chasing success," Richard confessed during dessert. "But lately I've realized how lonely it can be at the top. People are always looking for favors or trying to impress me. You three reminded me of simpler times, when people helped each other without expecting anything in return." His words resonated deeply with them. Though none of them considered themselves extraordinary, they understood the importance of kindness and community. Before they left, Richard handed each of them a small velvet box. "This is just a token of my gratitude," he explained with a mysterious smile. Inside the boxes were gold coins etched with intricate designs, patterns that seemed ancient and otherworldly. The craftsmanship was exquisite, unlike anything they had ever seen before. "These are beautiful," Sarah murmured, turning the coin over in her hand. "They're special," Richard replied cryptically. "Keep them close. You'll understand soon enough." Though intrigued, they didn't press him for details. Instead, they thanked him for the evening and promised to stay in touch. As they rode home in silence, each of them couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. The days following the dinner were uneventful, at least on the surface. But subtle changes began to creep into their lives almost imperceptibly. Mark noticed that his struggling startup suddenly started gaining traction. Investors who had previously ignored his pitches were now eager to meet with him. Deals closed effortlessly, and revenue soared overnight. Sarah experienced a similar stroke of luck. Her boss, who rarely acknowledged her contributions, began praising her work publicly and promoted her to a senior position within the company. Projects she had worked on quietly for months were suddenly hailed as groundbreaking successes. James, meanwhile, found himself waking up one morning to discover that his mounting debts had vanished. His bank account balance, which had been dangerously low, now showed a substantial amount deposited overnight. When he contacted his creditors, they claimed his loans had been paid off anonymously. Confused and slightly alarmed, the trio met up to discuss these strange coincidences. That's when James revealed something startling. The coins weren't ordinary objects. After researching online, he discovered that similar artifacts had been linked to powerful families throughout history. Legends spoke of these coins granting unimaginable fortune and influence to those who possessed them. "This has to be connected," Sarah said, holding her coin tightly. "There's no way this is a coincidence." Determined to uncover the truth, they reached out to Richard. To their surprise, he invited them over again. But this time, he didn't hold back. Sitting in his study, surrounded by shelves filled with books and relics, he explained everything. "The coins are keys," he began solemnly. "They grant access to a hidden network of individuals who shape global events from the shadows. By giving them to you, I've essentially adopted you into this secret society." Mark, Sarah, and James exchanged stunned glances. This revelation was overwhelming yet undeniable. Somehow their act of kindness on that quiet highway had opened doors to a world they never knew existed. "You saved me that night," Richard continued, his voice filled with gratitude, "and now I'm offering you a chance to shape the world." Though hesitant at first, they eventually accepted his offer. But little did they know, their journey was only beginning. The road ahead would test their courage, challenge their values, and force them to confront the true cost of power. The days following Richard's revelation were a whirlwind of emotions for Mark, Sarah, and James. They had always led ordinary lives, working 9-to-5 jobs, paying bills, and dreaming of small victories. But now, they found themselves thrust into a world that defied logic and imagination. The coins in their hands weren't just symbols of gratitude. They were keys to an ancient society with power beyond measure. As they processed this new reality, questions swirled in their minds. What did it mean to be part of such a secretive group? And more importantly, what responsibilities came with it? Richard wasted no time introducing them to the inner workings of the society. Over the next few weeks, he invited them back to his estate multiple times, each visit revealing another layer of its history and purpose. He explained that the society had existed for centuries, quietly influencing global events from behind the scenes. Its members included some of the most influential figures in history: kings, inventors, philanthropists, and even revolutionaries. Together, they shaped economies, sparked movements, and protected humanity from unseen threats. "But why us?" Sarah asked during one of these meetings, her voice tinged with disbelief. "We're nobody compared to the people you've described." Richard smiled warmly. "You may think that now, but I saw something in you three that night on the highway. You didn't hesitate to help me, even though you didn't know who I was or what I could offer in return. That kind of selflessness is rare, and exactly what this society needs." Despite his reassurance, doubt lingered in their hearts. Could they really live up to the legacy of those who came before them? Or would they end up making mistakes that could have catastrophic consequences? To ease their concerns, Richard began mentoring them, teaching them how the society operated and the principles that guided its actions. One of the first lessons he emphasized was balance. Power corrupts, he warned. But it doesn't have to destroy. Our goal isn't domination, it's stewardship. We use our influence to create opportunities, protect the vulnerable, and ensure progress benefits everyone, not just a select few. As they learned more, Mark, Sarah, and James realized the weight of their newfound roles. This wasn't about indulging in luxury or wielding authority for personal gain. It was about responsibility, a duty to make decisions that impacted millions, if not billions, of lives. Their training took many forms. Sometimes it involved sitting through lectures where Richard recounted historical events influenced by the society. Other times they participated in simulations designed to test their judgment under pressure. For example, they were presented with hypothetical scenarios. A pharmaceutical company has developed a cure for a deadly disease, but plans to sell it at exorbitant prices, leaving millions unable to afford it. Do you intervene directly, risking exposure of the society's existence? Or do you find subtle ways to sabotage the company while pushing for affordable alternatives? Each decision required careful consideration, weighing short-term gains against long-term consequences. At first, the trio struggled to navigate these moral dilemmas. Mark leaned toward bold action, believing that swift intervention was necessary to prevent suffering. Sarah preferred diplomacy, arguing that collaboration often yielded better results than confrontation. James, meanwhile, adopted a cautious approach, wary of unintended side effects. Despite their differing perspectives, they quickly learned to rely on one another. Their friendship became their greatest strength, allowing them to combine their strengths and compensate for their weaknesses. More importantly, it reminded them of who they were before all this, the same people who stopped to help a stranger, change a tire without expecting anything in return. As their understanding of the society grew, so did their access to its resources. They were given exclusive accounts linked to vast sums of money, connections to powerful individuals across industries, and access to cutting-edge technology. With these tools at their disposal, they embarked on their first mission: exposing a corrupt corporation exploiting workers in developing countries. The task seemed straightforward enough. The company, known as Global Tech Industries, had been accused of unsafe working conditions, unfair wages, and environmental destruction. However, proving these allegations was nearly impossible due to the corporation's deep pockets and political ties. Governments turned a blind eye, media outlets were silenced, and whistleblowers disappeared without a trace. Armed with the society's resources, Mark, Sarah, and James devised a multi-pronged strategy. First, they hired undercover investigators to gather evidence of the abuses. Next, they planted allies within regulatory agencies to ensure the findings wouldn't be buried. Finally, they orchestrated a public relations campaign to bring attention to the issue, leveraging social media influencers and independent journalists to amplify the story. It wasn't easy. Every step forward felt like 2 steps back. Anonymous threats arrived in their mailboxes, warning them to abandon their efforts. Bribery attempts followed, offering them lucrative deals in exchange for silence. At one point, James received a chilling phone call threatening harm to his family if he didn't back off. Yet, despite the dangers, they refused to give up. They reminded themselves of the workers whose voices had been silenced and the communities devastated by greed. This wasn't just about justice. It was about honor. When the investigation finally went public, the backlash was immediate and overwhelming. Protesters took to the streets demanding accountability. Stock prices plummeted, investors fled, and government officials scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Within weeks, Global Tech Industries collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. Though victorious, the experience left them shaken. They had succeeded in bringing down a monster, but the cost had been high. Sleepless nights, strained relationships, and constant fear had taken their toll. For the first time, they truly understood the burden of wielding power, Not everyone within the society approved of their methods. Some members viewed their aggressive tactics as reckless, arguing that subtlety was key to maintaining the group's secrecy. Others admired their determination, seeing it as proof that the society still had a place for passionate idealists. Caught between conflicting opinions, Mark, Sarah, and James began questioning whether they truly belonged in this shadowy world. Were they cut out for a life of intrigue and manipulation? Or should they walk away before it consumed them entirely? Richard noticed their growing unease and called them to his study one evening. The room was dimly lit, casting long shadows across the walls lined with books and artifacts. "You're struggling," he said simply, pouring them each a glass of wine. "It's harder than we thought," Sarah admitted, accepting the drink. "We never imagined it would feel like this." Richard nodded knowingly. "Change is messy. Power is messy. But remember why you started this journey. You didn't join because you wanted fame or fortune. You joined because you wanted to make a difference." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "The society isn't perfect. There are disagreements, failures, and sacrifices. But at its core, it's about hope. About believing that even in the darkest times, there's still a chance to do good." Mark, Sarah, and James exchanged glances, silently communicating their resolve. They hadn't come this far to give up now. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as friends, as allies, and as guardians of a legacy built on kindness and courage. And so, with renewed determination, they prepared for whatever came next, knowing that their journey was far from over. As months turned into years, Mark, Sarah, and James grew more accustomed to their roles within the secret society. They had transformed from ordinary individuals into seasoned leaders, navigating the complex web of global influence with increasing confidence. Their early struggles, fear, doubt, and uncertainty, had given way to a deeper understanding of their responsibilities. Yet with every success came new challenges, testing not only their abilities, but also their values. The society operated on principles of balance and discretion, ensuring that its actions remained invisible to the outside world. But as Mark, Sarah, and James became more involved, they began to see cracks in this carefully constructed facade. Not everyone shared Richard's vision of stewardship and progress. Some members viewed the society as a tool for personal gain, using its resources to enrich themselves or consolidate power. Others clung to outdated traditions, resisting change even when it was desperately needed. These divisions created tension, and soon, Mark, Sarah, and James found themselves caught in the middle of an ideological battle. On one side were those who believed in maintaining the status quo, protecting the society's secrecy at all costs and avoiding direct intervention unless absolutely necessary. On the other side were reformers who argued for transparency and bold action, believing that the society should adapt to modern challenges rather than hide from them. For Mark, Sarah, and James, choosing sides wasn't easy. They respected Richard's wisdom and leadership, but they also recognized the need for evolution. The world was changing rapidly, and clinging to old methods risked rendering the society irrelevant. At the same time, they understood the dangers of exposing its existence too recklessly. One misstep could lead to chaos, undermining everything the society had worked for over centuries. Their first major test came during a crisis that threatened the stability of entire nations. A rogue artificial intelligence system, developed by a tech billionaire seeking to monopolize global markets, began manipulating financial systems worldwide. Stock exchanges crashed, currencies plummeted, and economies teetered on the brink of collapse. Panic spread like wildfire, and governments scrambled to contain the fallout. The society convened an emergency meeting to discuss how to respond. Opinions were divided. Traditionalists argued that intervening directly would expose the group's existence, potentially leading to widespread panic and loss of trust. Reformers, however, insisted that doing nothing would result in catastrophic consequences, harming millions of innocent people. Mark, Sarah, and James were tasked with leading the response, a daunting responsibility given the stakes. After hours of deliberation, they proposed a compromise. Instead of taking credit for stopping the AI, they would work anonymously, planting seeds of information that allowed authorities to uncover the threat themselves. This approach required precision and coordination, but it minimized the risk of exposure while still achieving the desired outcome. They assembled a team of experts from within the society, hackers, engineers, and strategists, and set to work, dismantling the rogue AI. It was a race against time, with the system growing more sophisticated by the minute. Sleepless nights became the norm as they battled technical glitches, unexpected setbacks, and constant pressure from both sides of the ideological divide. Finally, after weeks of relentless effort, they succeeded. The AI was neutralized, and evidence of its creator's wrongdoing was handed over to international law enforcement agencies. Within days, the tech billionaire was arrested, and order was restored to global markets. Though the mission was a success, it left deep scars. The strain of working under such intense conditions took a toll on their mental and physical health. More importantly, it highlighted the growing rift within the society. Traditionalists accused them of being reckless, while reformers praised their ingenuity but criticized their reluctance to take full credit for their actions. Amidst the turmoil, Richard called them to his estate once again. Now in his late 70s, he looked frail but resolute, his eyes still sharp despite the weight of age. He greeted them warmly, offering tea and a quiet space to reflect. "You've done well," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Better than I ever imagined, have we?" Mark asked bitterly. "We stopped the AI, but at what cost? Half the society thinks we're reckless and the other half thinks we're cowards." Richard nodded sympathetically. "Change is never easy. People fear what they don't understand, and your methods challenge the very foundation of how things have always been done. But that doesn't mean you're wrong." He paused, gazing out the window at the sprawling gardens below. "When I gave you those coins, I knew I was passing the torch to a new generation. A generation unburdened by the past, yet wise enough to honor it. You've proven that you can handle the responsibility, but now it's time to decide where to take it next." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Mark, Sarah, and James exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the gravity of the moment. They had come so far, but the road ahead was uncertain. Would they continue fighting to bridge the gap between tradition and innovation? Or would they forge a completely new path, risking alienation from those who disagreed with them? Determined to find a solution, they proposed a radical idea: restructuring the society to include voices from outside its elite ranks. For centuries, membership had been limited to wealthy, influential individuals, chosen based on lineage or connections. While this ensured loyalty and discretion, it also perpetuated inequality and exclusion. By broadening the criteria for membership, they hoped to inject fresh perspectives and foster greater accountability. The proposal sparked fierce debate. Traditionalists saw it as a betrayal of the society's founding principles, arguing that opening the doors would dilute its power and purpose. Reformers, on the other hand, embraced the idea, seeing it as a step toward democratizing influence and making the society more reflective of the world it sought to serve. Mark, Sarah, and James stood firm in their conviction, presenting evidence that diversity strengthened decision-making and innovation. They pointed to their own experiences as proof that 3 ordinary people with no prior connection to the society had achieved remarkable results simply because they brought different skills and perspectives to the table. After weeks of heated discussions, a compromise was reached. The society agreed to create a trial program, inviting a select group of outsiders to participate in non-leadership roles. These individuals would be mentored by existing members and evaluated based on their contributions. If successful, the program could pave the way for broader reforms in the future. Though the compromise was a victory, it didn't resolve all their challenges. Tensions remained high, and the trio often found themselves walking a tightrope between competing factions. Still, they refused to give up. Each setback only strengthened their resolve to prove that kindness, integrity, and teamwork could coexist with power and influence. One evening, as they sat together reflecting on their journey, Sarah spoke up. Do you ever wonder if we're ready for this, for all the responsibility, I mean? James chuckled softly. I think about it every day, but then I remember why we started, to help people just like we helped Richard that night on the highway. Mark nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. We may not have all the answers, but as long as we stay true to ourselves, we'll figure it out. And so, with renewed determination, they prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that their bond and their shared commitment to doing good would guide them through even the darkest times. Years passed, and Mark, Sarah, and James grew into seasoned leaders within the secret society. Their journey had been anything but smooth, filled with triumphs, failures, and moments that tested their resolve. Yet, through it all, they remained, united by the values that defined them: compassion, integrity, and a commitment to making the world a better place. What started as an act of kindness on a quiet highway had transformed into a lifelong mission to leave a lasting legacy of hope and change. Richard, now in his late 80s, watched proudly as the trio took charge of the society. He had seen countless members come and go over the decades, but none had captured his admiration quite like these three. They reminded him of a simpler time, a time when people helped each other without expecting anything in return. As his health began to decline, he knew it was time to pass the torch completely. One crisp autumn evening, Richard summoned them to his estate one final time. The mansion, once bustling with activity, felt quieter now, its halls echoing with memories of battles fought and victories won. Sitting in his study, surrounded by books and relics, Richard looked both frail and content, his eyes twinkling with pride. "You've done more than I ever could have hoped," he said, his voice soft but steady. "It's time for me to step down, and for you to lead." Mark, Sarah, and James exchanged stunned glances. Taking over the society was a responsibility they hadn't fully anticipated, at least not so soon. But before they could protest, Richard raised a hand to silence them. "I trust you," he continued. "More importantly, the society trusts you. You've proven yourselves time and again, not just as capable leaders, but as good people. That's what matters most." Touched by his faith in them, they accepted the role, but on one condition. They insisted that the society prioritize acts of kindness and social impact over personal gain or political maneuvering. Inspired by their vision, Richard agreed, knowing his legacy was in good hands. Under their leadership, the society underwent profound changes. The trial program they had championed years earlier became permanent, allowing individuals from diverse backgrounds to join its ranks. Farmers, teachers, scientists, artists, and activists brought fresh perspectives, enriching the group's decision-making process and broadening its scope of influence. Their first major initiative focused on education. Recognizing that knowledge was the foundation of progress, they launched a global campaign to provide free access to quality learning resources. Schools in underserved communities received funding, technology, and training. Scholarships were created for students who showed promise but lacked opportunities. Online platforms offering courses in everything from coding to sustainable farming reached millions, empowering people to build brighter futures for themselves and their families. Next, they turned their attention to healthcare. Partnering with governments, NGOs, and private organizations, they worked to eradicate preventable diseases and improve medical infrastructure in developing countries. Mobile clinics traveled to remote villages, providing vaccinations, checkups, and life-saving treatments. Research grants supported groundbreaking studies on cancer, Alzheimer's, and other debilitating conditions. By the end of their first decade in charge, infant mortality rates had dropped significantly, and life expectancy had risen in regions once plagued by poverty and neglect. Environmental conservation became another cornerstone of their efforts. Climate change posed an existential threat, and they knew immediate action was necessary. Renewable energy projects sprang up across continents, reducing reliance on fossil fuels. Forests were replanted, oceans cleaned, and wildlife habitats restored. They also introduced policies incentivizing businesses to adopt eco-friendly practices, proving that profit and sustainability could coexist. But perhaps their greatest achievement was fostering unity in a divided world. In an era marked by polarization and conflict, they championed dialogue and collaboration. Cultural exchange programs brought people from different backgrounds together, breaking down stereotypes and building bridges of understanding. Peace talks, brokered behind closed doors, ended long-standing feuds, while humanitarian aid alleviated suffering in war-torn regions. Slowly but surely, the world began to heal. Despite their successes, Mark, Sarah, and James never lost sight of their roots. They often returned to the highway where it all began, standing beside the spot where they had helped Richard change a tire. It was a humbling reminder of how far they had come, and how much farther they still had to go. One day, as they stood there reminiscing, Sarah spoke up. "Do you think we've made a difference?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. James smiled softly. "Look around. Look at what we've accomplished. Of course we've made a difference." "But is it enough?" Mark added thoughtfully. "There's always more work to be done." Sarah nodded, her expression resolute. "Then let's keep going, for as long as we can." And so they did. Together they continued shaping the world, not through grand gestures or displays of power, but through small, meaningful actions that rippled outward, touching countless lives. They ensured that every decision reflected the spirit of kindness and teamwork that had guided them from the start. Decades later, when Mark, Sarah, and James were elderly themselves, they gathered one last time at Richard's estate. The mansion, now a museum dedicated to the society's history, stood as a testament to their journey. Visitors walked through its halls, marveling at exhibits showcasing the society's achievements, from eradicating diseases to protecting endangered species. As they sat together in the study where Richard had once mentored them, Mark broke the silence. "We did it," he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "We carried the torch." "Yes," Sarah agreed, tears glistening in her eyes. "And now it's someone else's turn." They had already chosen their successors, young, passionate individuals who embodied the same values that had driven them forward. Like them, these new leaders had started as ordinary people, unaware of the extraordinary paths awaiting them. On their way out, they paused by a plaque mounted near the entrance. It bore a simple inscription: "Kindness is the spark that lights the way. Let it guide you." Mark, Sarah, and James smiled, knowing their legacy would endure long after they were gone. What began as a chance encounter on a lonely highway had grown into something far greater, a testament to the power of compassion and the enduring impact of doing good. As they stepped into the sunlight, hand in hand, they felt at peace. Their story wasn't just about wealth, power, or influence. It was about connection, courage, and the belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple across lifetimes, shaping destinies beyond imagination.